Greetings from New Haven. I'm really so sorry that I'm not there with you in Amman. It's been a long time since I've been back in Jordan, but my very first trip was actually back in the 1960s when I was a student at the American University of Beirut. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the importance of responsive parenting and how we can work together as a team to make a difference in this world, particularly during these very difficult times that we are all facing. It's a real honor to be part of this forum for the Arab Network for Early Childhood. And what I'd like to do is first give my thanks to the Arab Resource Collective, and in particular to Dr. Ghassan Issa. I've been so impressed with Dr. Ghassan and his team. We've had an opportunity to work together for the last several years with a program focused on some of the very vulnerable populations in Palestinian camps based in Beirut, Lebanon. I'd like to thank the ARC team for the support that they have been giving to those vulnerable families for the last several years in terms of the programs that they've offered to try and make a difference in their lives. I'm also grateful for their commitment for evidence-based research. And for me, that's very important. I come from an academic background, and one of the ways that we can make a difference is actually to convince other scholars as well as other individuals across the planet, whether they're government officials, policymakers, funding agencies. And one of the best ways of doing that is actually by presenting compelling scientific evidence. I'm also grateful that the ARC team has been working to develop a more comprehensive plan and program that they can use for families across the region that extends all the way from pregnancy into the past the early years to ages 6, 7, and 8. And of course, finally, and perhaps most importantly, thank you, Dr. Ghassan, for organizing this Arab network on early childhood. I think it's really a step forward. Of course, I'm speaking on behalf of the entire Yale team, and maybe I can just mention some of the individuals that are there. Here is Angie Portuga. She's actually taking a major part in the leadership of the program that we're doing in Beirut, Lebanon. Kaveh Kaashnud actually just recently was in Beirut and has been there on several occasions and has been working closely with some of the faculty at the American University of Beirut. Rima Salah, a wonderful person. I'll say some more words about Rima before I finish my presentation, but she is a wonderful colleague who was born in Jerusalem, is a Jordanian citizen, and for years has worked with UNICEF in making a difference around the world for children. And she was just recently appointed by the Secretary General, Dr. Ban Ki-moon, for a special panel with regard to peace in the world. Anna Zonderman, Shimra Fallon, and Christina Moore are three of the other individuals that are actively involved in this project. I guess my take-home message is really we need to take action to make a difference in this world for our children and for future generations. And in order to do this, we need to create multi-sectorial partnerships. And for this reason, I am so grateful that Dr. Ghassan, in organizing this forum, has brought together government leaders, policymakers, individuals from various non-governmental organizations, as well as experts in the area, to begin this conversation and continue this conversation in terms of how we can implement and have in a sustainable fashion these programs offered throughout the region. I come from somewhat of an academic background, and I've been fascinated by the importance of parenting. Some of my earlier work actually focuses on the hormonal factors that are involved and some brain imaging studies that have been done where we're actually looking at how the brain responds to hearing your baby's cry or someone else's baby's cry, seeing a picture of your child in infancy versus the picture of another child that is not related to you. And what's clear as we work together, the biobehavioral systems that are involved in parenting and in bond formation are evolutionarily conserved. And these go back, and we can find very similar biobehavioral systems present in various species in terms of primates and even other forms of mammalian life. Wonderfully, there was just recently an article that was prepared for Science magazine, and there was a special issue that was offered in August of this year, and this was on parenting. And the subtitle, which you probably can't read that closely, is that parenting provides a legacy that transcends genes. And I'm convinced from the evidence that we have that responsive parenting has a direct impact on brain structure and brain function. And it has to do with the interconnectedness of all of the brain cells that we have and how our brains are organized. But interestingly, there have also been recent studies that actually have documented that responsive parenting and providing the best care for our children actually has an impact later in life with regard to our biological health. And I'll also mention a few words in a moment or two with regard to the economic impact and the cost-benefit analysis that comes with having early programs that make a difference in the lives of these children and families. So what is responsive parenting? That occurs when parents, mothers, fathers, and other caregivers do their best to invest in the child across multiple dimensions, whether it's emotional, cognitive, physical needs during pregnancy and beyond, making sure their nutritional status is adequate. And what we found, and this is an article, this is actually a report from Bernard Van Leer Foundation. As you can see here, it says Early Childhood Matters. And this was published earlier this year in June. And wonderfully, it documents how if we have responsive parenting programs, we can actually reduce violence. Violence within the home, violence within the community. And wonderfully, several of those programs that they actually documented in this report were actually ones that were performed in Jordan. Here I'm thinking about the Better Parenting program that was done in Jordan. And I'm hopeful that some of the individuals that were responsible for that program that was funded through the Bernard Van Leer Foundation are actually here with us in the audience today. So programs that are designed to provide responsive parenting can lead for opportunities for a transformational change. And there's not enough time to go through this in a great deal of detail, and in part it has to do with the epigenetic changes that are determined by how you're raised and how that can influence things like genetic expression in different areas of your brain. But I'm convinced that if we do a good job, if we're able to have these programs in place and have them available in a sustainable fashion in areas where there is truly vulnerable families, that we can have better brains and a more peaceful mind, a more healthy body. We can also prevent violence, and oftentimes these programs actually have direct components that focus on issues about how your child is being disciplined. It's usually not the very first item that comes up for discussion, but it's one of the ones that can make a real difference moving forward in terms of how those children are responded to when they behave in a way that is challenging for the parents. It's also been a source of interest for us, and I can say a few words about this in a moment, that if we can actually build more peaceful families, if we can have mechanisms by which we can bring parents together to talk to each other about how they're raising their children, in particular, if we can actually bring together at times fathers to talk with one another and actually form a group around those issues, I think there's a real potential that we can also have more peaceful communities. And interestingly, the cost-benefit analyses that have been done have also shown a very positive economic outcome, and that's in part because the adults are much more successful in terms of where they're at in the world, in terms of the jobs that they hold, and the kinds of issues that they're able to provide support for within their own communities. So this is James Heckman. He's a Nobel laureate from the University of Chicago. And basically, he's looked at the long-term outcomes of many of the interventions that have been done, although mostly in high-income countries. And what he's determined, and perhaps it's no surprise to any of us or any of you in the audience, is that the earlier we invest in children, focusing now on issues having to do with pregnancy, the first few years of life, the bigger the return on that investment in terms of dollars spent and dollars returned for that investment. So in addition to the work that we're doing with ARC, And we've also been talking with people in Saudi Arabia about doing a similar program in Riyadh. We've had other discussions in a preliminary way with other individuals in the Arab world. We've also been actively talking with individuals in Brazil, and this is just a picture of the delegation that came to Yale this past summer. And I recently had the opportunity to visit Brazil, and I walked through some of the poor areas of Salvador, which is in the northeastern part of Brazil, as well as in São Paulo. And wonderfully, they're beginning some of these early childhood programs there, and that's one of the other initiatives that we're hoping to see get underway. The first time that I met Dr. Ghassan in person was actually at the United Nations back in September of 2013 at the launch of the Early Childhood Peace Consortium. And you can see some of the individuals that were present there. One of the key partners for us in this effort has been ACEV, the Mother Child Education Foundation that's based in Turkey. And there are a number of individuals from that foundation that are present. But you can also see Rima Saleh here, other experts such as Sue Carter, who's the person who taught me all about oxytocin, which is one of the hormones that is very important with regard to affiliative behaviors across the various species that we have in our mammalian ancestry, as well as individuals like Pia Brito, who left Yale, although she's still in my heart, to go down to UNICEF and to work very actively with them in terms of the early childhood efforts that they have underway there. So one of the other initiatives that we've taken recently has actually been to work with the Ernst Strougglin Forum that is based in Frankfurt, Germany, and bring together scholars from across the world, from individuals who are experts with regard to affiliative behavior and mammalian species, all the way to individuals who've been working on peacemaking in South Africa and Northern Ireland and around the world, as well as experts in early child development, as well as policymakers, because you need to have all of these sectors represented when you consider some of these questions. And the question that we posed to ourselves at that meeting in Frankfurt that took place in October of 2013 is whether or not, if we invest in early childhood, can we have a more peaceful world? So this volume was just published, and if I were there in person, I would be giving Dr. Ghassan a copy of this book directly. So hopefully I can get it to you sooner or later, but I think you'll find it of some real interest. So I'm coming to the end of my brief presentation, and what I'd like you to be thinking about and what I'd like to be partnering with you in terms of how we can move forward together is some of the challenges and opportunities that we face. There are so many early childhood programs. How can we work together to scale up programs of proven value across the entire Arab world? How can we work together to establish a strong evidence-based for including randomized clinical trials and prospective longitudinal follow-up studies? These are the kinds of studies that can truly make a difference. And I'm so grateful for ARC and Dr. Ghassan and his team, Cosette and Lara and Abir and others, in terms of the ability to actually do a randomized clinical trial in the Palestinian camps in Beirut. And hopefully this is something that we can continue to do in other parts of the Arab world. But the key issue is strategic partnerships. How can we bring together government officials, individuals from the local communities, individuals from the communities themselves, as well as policymakers on a broader scale, the United Nations and other places, as well as funders and NGOs that are actually going to implement the programs. That's a real challenge, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the results of your discussions are there in Amman. And of course, we need to also have public awareness campaigns so that families become more aware of the need to know and respond in a different way, or at least in a more responsive way to their children. And so one of the big questions is how can our network, your network, actually move forward to make this a reality. So I'll just end with a few perspectives. This is a quote from Martin Luther King. In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All persons are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is an interrelated structure of reality and our world. And I believe that we are all interconnected. Even though I'm pretty far from Amman right now, I do feel like I'm part of the group. And our world is constantly changing. And that's true whether you're looking at social groups and networks, whether you're looking at the way in which our neurons connect and communicate with one another in our own brains, or whether you go out and look at simulations of what's going on with regard to dark matter and dark energy. So with that, thank you, Ghassan. Thank you, and I do apologize for not being there in person. And on behalf of the Yale team, I'd like to say, have a wonderful time in Amman, and I will be with you the next time. Thank you.